My twin sister showed up at 2 a.m., hurt and terrified. When I learned the truth about her husband, we switched places that same night. He had no idea who he was really dealing with, and what we did next destroyed him. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me back up and explain how I knew this day would eventually come. See, Patty and I might share the same DNA, but we've made spectacularly different life choices. While I divorced my controlling ex-husband 8 years ago and built a successful consulting business, Patty married Marcus Reynolds 3 years ago, a man who seemed too good to be true. And as my grandmother used to say, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. Except in this case, it was too bad to be true. I threw on my robe and hurried downstairs, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floors. Through the glass panel beside my front door, I could see Patty swaying slightly, clutching her purse against her chest like a shield. Her usually perfect blonde hair was matted with what looked suspiciously like blood. "Jesus, Patty, what happened to you?" I yanked open the door and pulled her inside, immediately scanning the driveway behind her. No headlights, no cars following. That was something, at least. She stumbled into my living room and collapsed onto my sofa, the same spot where she'd announced her engagement to Marcus with starry eyes and a rock the size of a small country on her finger. Now those same eyes were filled with terror. "Maggie, I need your help." Her voice was barely a whisper. Nothing like the confident real estate broker who could sell ice to penguins. "I found something that changes everything." I sat across from her in my favorite armchair, the one that had cost me a fortune but was worth every penny for moments like this. "Start from the beginning. Did Marcus do this to you?" She shook her head, then winced at the movement. "Not directly. I mean, he hit me, but that's not—" "Oh God, Maggie, you have to promise me you won't call the police. Not yet." Now that was interesting. In all our years of me bailing her out of various disasters, Patty had never asked me to avoid calling authorities. She was the rule follower, the one who colored inside the lines while I specialized in redrawing the boundaries entirely. "What did you find?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Patty fumbled with her purse and pulled out a small silver key. "This opens a safety deposit box that Marcus doesn't know I know about. I found the receipt in his jacket pocket when I was taking it to the dry cleaner." She looked at me with those identical green eyes we'd inherited from our mother. "Maggie, there are things in that box that prove Marcus isn't who he says he is." I leaned forward, my consultant brain already shifting into analytical mode. "What kind of things?" "The kind that could destroy multiple families. The kind that could put him in prison for the rest of his life." She took a shaky breath. "The kind that make me realize I've been married to a stranger for 3 years." The grandfather clock in my hallway chimed 2:30 a.m., a sound that usually comforted me, but now felt ominous. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows of my suburban home, and I found myself grateful for the isolation that had annoyed me just yesterday. "Patty, you need to tell me exactly what was in that box." She met my gaze, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw not fear, but determination. Birth certificates, multiple social security cards, bank account information for accounts in different names. She paused. And photographs of at least 6 different women, all of them dead. The room went silent except for the ticking of that damn clock. I stared at my sister, processing what she'd just told me. Multiple identities, dead women. This wasn't just about a bad marriage anymore. "There's more," Patty continued, her voice gaining strength. "I think Marcus has done this before. I think he marries women, steals their money, and then—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, needing the familiar ritual of making tea to keep my hands busy while my mind raced. Through the window above my sink, I could see the reflection of my living room where my twin sister sat bleeding and broken, holding evidence that her husband was likely a serial killer. "When did you find all this?" I called out, filling the kettle with steady hands that belied the chaos in my head. "This afternoon. Marcus thought I was at my mother's house, but I came home early because I forgot my laptop." Her voice carried into the kitchen. I heard him on the phone in his study, talking about liquidating assets and making arrangements for a trip. When I heard him coming, I hid in the hall closet. I returned to the living room carrying 2 steaming mugs handing one to Patty before settling back into my chair. What exactly did you hear? He was talking to someone about moving money offshore. Something about cleaning up loose ends before the wedding anniversary next month. She took a sip of tea, her hands trembling slightly. He said the current situation had become too complicated and it was time to start fresh. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Marcus followed his apparent pattern, Patty's third wedding anniversary would likely be her last day alive. That's when I went looking for the key, she continued. I knew he kept important documents somewhere in the house, but I'd never found them. When I discovered that safety deposit box receipt, I had to know what was inside. I studied my sister's face, noting the way her jaw had set in that stubborn line I knew so well. We might have chosen different paths in life, but we were both Campbell women, and Campbell women didn't go down without a fight. Patty, why didn't you go straight to the police with this? Because I need more than just photographs and fake IDs. I need concrete proof of what he's done. She set down her mug and looked at me directly. And because I have an idea that could give us both of those things. I'm listening. Marcus has never met you. He knows I have a twin sister, but I've always kept you separate from that part of my life. She paused, gauging my reaction. He's going out of town tomorrow night for what he says is a business meeting. He'll be gone until Sunday. Where this conversation was heading became clear, and I felt that familiar rush of adrenaline that had served me well in my corporate career. You want me to take your place? He keeps his computer locked in his study when he's home. But if he thinks I'm you, visiting while he's away, she shrugged. You're a cybersecurity consultant, Maggie. You could find things in his computer that I wouldn't even know to look for. I had to admit. The plan had potential. Marcus had made the classic mistake of underestimating the woman he'd married. He saw Patty as a beautiful, somewhat naive real estate broker who'd been grateful for his attention. He had no idea she was related to someone who'd spent the last 8 years helping corporations identify and eliminate security threats. What makes you think I can just walk into your house and fool him? I asked, though my mind was already working through the logistics. Because we're identical twins who've been switching places since we were 5 years old. For the first time since she'd arrived, Patty smiled. Remember when we fooled your trigonometry teacher for an entire month? I did remember. I also remembered the thrill of pulling off something that everyone said was impossible. But this wasn't high school mathematics. This was life and death. If we do this, Patty, there's no going back. Once we start down this path, we're committed to seeing it through to the end. She nodded slowly. I know. But Maggie, if we don't do something, I'm going to end up like those women in the photographs. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the fragile victim who'd stumbled into my living room, but the same determined woman who'd built a successful business from nothing. She was right. We were identical twins who'd been fooling people our entire lives. And if Marcus Reynolds thought he could eliminate my sister like she was some disposable asset, he was about to learn that he'd messed with the wrong family. All right, I said, setting down my mug with finality. Let's destroy this bastard. But first, I needed to know exactly what we were walking into, because something told me Marcus Reynolds had more surprises waiting for us than either of us had imagined. Tell me everything about your daily routine with Marcus, I said, pulling out a legal pad from my home office. If I was going to successfully impersonate my sister, I needed to know every detail of her life with the man who was apparently planning to kill her. Patty winced as she shifted on the sofa, and I made a mental note to get some ice for her face. He leaves for work at 7:30 every morning. He's obsessive about his schedule, coffee at exactly 7:15, shower at 6:45, breakfast at 7:20. Everything is timed to the minute. What kind of work does he do? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be another lie. He says he's in import-export, Reynolds International Trading. She laughed bitterly. God, I was so stupid. Import-export is the oldest cover story in the book for money laundering. Isn't it? Actually, it was. But I kept that observation to myself for now. What about evenings, weekends? He works late a lot, always has meetings that run long or business dinners. Patty touched her swollen eye gingerly. I used to think it was sweet that he never wanted me to wait up for him. Now I realize he just didn't want me asking questions about where he'd really been. I scribbled notes, my consultant brain automatically organizing information into patterns. Does he have any regular habits? Gym memberships, hobbies, friends who come over? He goes to Prestige Fitness on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Never misses it. She paused, thinking. And he has poker night with his business associates every other Friday. That's tomorrow night, actually, which is perfect for our plan. Interesting. Poker nights were excellent cover for all sorts of illegal activities. Tell me about the house. Security systems? Cameras. Anything I need to know about. Basic alarm system, but he only sets it at night. No cameras inside, but there are 2 outside. One at the front door, one at the back. Patty rubbed her temples. He's paranoid about people seeing who comes and goes, which I thought was just normal rich guy caution. How rich are we talking? The house is worth about $1.2 million. He drives a BMW, I drive a Mercedes. We eat at expensive restaurants, take luxury vacations. She met my eyes. All funded by money that I now realize probably came from murdering women. I felt that familiar cold anger settling in my chest, the same emotion that had driven me to leave my controlling ex-husband and build my own empire. Some men thought they could own women like property, discarding them when they became inconvenient. Marcus Reynolds was about to learn how expensive that mistake could be. What about his study? You said he keeps it locked. Electronic keypad lock, but I know the code. It's my birthday. Her mouth twisted. I thought it was romantic. Now I think he just wanted me to have a false sense of trust while keeping me out of the important stuff. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where I'd rebuilt my life after my divorce. Everything about my existence here was calm, controlled, predictable. In 12 hours, I was going to walk into a house with a man who killed women for a living, and I'd never been more focused in my life. Patty, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. I turned to face her. How good an actress are you? What do you mean? I mean, can you pretend to be a loving wife to a man you now know is a serial killer? Can you smile and make small talk and act normal while we gather evidence? Because if Marcus suspects anything at all, we're both dead. She was quiet for a long moment, and I watched her process the full magnitude of what we were proposing. Finally, she nodded. I've been pretending to be happy in my marriage for months. Turns out, I'm better at acting than I thought. Good, because here's what we're going to do. I sat back down, pulling my chair closer. Tomorrow morning, you're going to go home and act like nothing happened. You're going to tell Marcus you fell down the stairs or walked into a door, whatever story explains your injuries. You're going to be the perfect wife all day. And then, tomorrow evening, when he leaves for poker night, you're going to call me. I'll come over, and we'll make the switch. You'll stay here while I spend the weekend at your house, going through his computer and looking for evidence. Patty frowned. What if he comes home early? Then I'll handle it. But first, I need you to teach me everything about being Mrs. Marcus Reynolds. I picked up my pen again. Starting with how you met him. Online dating. One of those upscale sites for professionals. She laughed ruefully. His profile said he was a widower who'd lost his wife in a car accident. He was looking for someone to build a new life with. Did you ever verify that story? Why would I? He seemed genuinely heartbroken when he talked about her. Patty shook her head. God, I'm such an idiot. No, you're trusting. There's a difference. Though in this case, trust had nearly gotten her killed. What was his wife's name? Catherine Reynolds. He said she died 5 years ago. Patty paused. You don't think... I think Catherine Reynolds was probably wife number 1, and you were going to be the last Mrs. Reynolds he ever needed. I made more notes. Tell me about your first date. For the next 2 hours, Patty walked me through 3 years of marriage to a man who'd been planning her murder since their wedding day. She told me about his preferences. He liked his coffee black, his steaks medium rare, and his wives compliant. She described his temper, which flared when things didn't go according to his meticulously planned schedule. She explained his habits, from his obsessive gym routine to his collection of expensive watches. By the time the sun started rising over my neighborhood, I had 15 pages of notes and a clear picture of the man I was going to have to deceive. Marcus Reynolds was organized, controlling, and methodical. He planned everything down to the smallest detail and expected his world to run like clockwork, which meant he'd never expect his wife's identical twin to walk into his life and dismantle everything he'd built. There's one more thing, Patty said as I walked her to the door. Marcus has a safe in the bedroom closet. I don't know the combination, but I've seen him open it twice. I think he keeps cash in there and maybe other important documents. Can you describe exactly where it is and what it looks like? She gave me the details, and I filed them away with everything else. Patty, once I go into that house tomorrow night, I need you to stay here and keep your head down. No phone calls, no errands, nothing that might tip him off if he's monitoring you. You really think he's watching me? I think Marcus Reynolds is a predator who's gotten away with murder multiple times because he's careful and thorough. I opened the front door, checking the street for any signs of surveillance, which means we have to be more careful and more thorough than he is. Patty hugged me tightly, and for a moment we were just two scared sisters holding on to each other. Then she pulled back, and I saw the steel in her eyes that reminded me we were related. Maggie, what if you find proof that he killed those other women? Then we make sure he never kills anyone else. I met her gaze steadily. And we make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monster Marcus Reynolds really is. As I watched her drive away in her Mercedes, I realized I was actually looking forward to this. It had been too long since I'd had a challenge that mattered, a problem that required every skill I'd developed over decades of consulting. Marcus Reynolds thought he was a master manipulator who could control and eliminate women at will. He was about to discover that some women fight back. But first, I had a serial killer to fool and 24 hours to prepare for the performance of my lifetime. I spent Friday preparing like I was going to war, because in many ways I was. By noon, I'd researched everything I could find about Marcus Reynolds online, which wasn't much, and that told me a story all by itself. Men with legitimate businesses usually left digital footprints. Men with something to hide worked very hard to stay invisible. The address for Reynolds International Trading led to a small office in a generic business complex, the kind of place that rented by the month to companies that needed an address for tax purposes, but never actually conducted business there. His LinkedIn profile was sparse, with connections to other professionals whose profiles looked equally manufactured. Even his Facebook account, which Patty had shown me screenshots of, felt curated rather than genuine. At 3 p.m., I drove to Patty's neighborhood for reconnaissance. I needed to understand the layout of their street, identify potential escape routes, and get a feel for how visible the house was to neighbors. What I found was both good and bad news. Good. The Reynolds home sat on 2 acres of heavily wooded property with excellent privacy. Bad. The same isolation that would help me search the house unobserved also meant no one would hear me scream if things went wrong. I parked 3 blocks away and walked past the house twice, once as a jogger and once as someone talking on their phone. The property was impressive, a sprawling colonial with professional landscaping and the kind of quiet elegance that whispered money rather than shouting it. The security cameras Patty had mentioned were subtly positioned, but clearly high quality. Marcus Reynolds was a man who valued his privacy. At 6 p.m., my phone rang. Patty's voice was steady but tense. He's leaving now. Kissed me goodbye and said he'd be late because they're going to Lucky's after poker. He won't be back until after midnight. How's your acting holding up? Better than I expected. I made his favorite dinner, listened to him complain about a delayed shipment, and nodded sympathetically when he mentioned how tired he's been lately. She paused. Maggie, there was something different about the way he looked at me tonight, like he was memorizing my face. That sent a chill through me. Different how? Sad, almost. The way you'd look at someone you were about to lose. Her voice dropped. I think our timeline might be shorter than we thought. I was already grabbing my keys and the bag I'd packed with everything I might need. I'm on my way. 20 minutes. The drive to Patty's house gave me time to run through my mental checklist one more time. I'd studied the photos she'd given me of Marcus, memorized his daily schedule, and rehearsed responses to questions he might ask. I'd changed my hair to match hers exactly and practiced her slightly softer speaking voice. Most importantly, I'd prepared myself mentally for the possibility that Marcus might return unexpectedly. Patty met me at the back door, looking more composed than she had at 2 a.m., but still fragile around the edges. His computer is in the study. I wrote down the password. He uses the same one for everything, which is either careless or arrogant. Probably both. I took the slip of paper and memorized the combination of letters and numbers. Catherine, 1986. His dead wife's name and birth year? That's what I assumed. But now I'm wondering if Catherine Reynolds ever existed at all. Patty handed me her wedding ring, a massive diamond that felt cold against my palm. Be careful, Maggie. Promise me. I'll be fine. I've dealt with dangerous men before, though none quite like this, I admitted silently. You go to my house and stay put. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, don't come back here until I call you. After Patty left, I spent 20 minutes walking through the house, getting familiar with the layout and noting details she might have forgotten to mention. The place was immaculate, decorated with expensive but impersonal furniture that looked like it had been chosen by a professional. There were photos of Marcus and Patty throughout the house, but no pictures of family or friends from before their marriage. It was like Marcus Reynolds had materialized fully formed 3 years ago. His study was on the first floor, accessible through French doors that were currently unlocked. Inside, I found exactly what I'd expected from a control freak. Everything organized to the millimeter, files labeled with military precision, and a computer setup that probably cost more than most people's cars. Marcus's computer was password protected, but Patty's information got me past the first barrier. What I found in his files made my blood run cold. Folder after folder of detailed financial information on women, not just bank accounts and investment portfolios, but psychological profiles, daily routines, and security vulnerabilities. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was business. I recognized 2 of the names from obituaries I found in his bookmarks. Sarah Mitchell, 34, died in a hiking accident in Colorado. Jennifer Walsh, 29, drowned in her bathtub after apparently slipping and hitting her head. Both had been widows with substantial inheritances and no close family. Both had dated Marcus under different names. The most chilling discovery was a spreadsheet titled Project Timelines. It listed 12 women by first name only, with dates spanning the last 8 years. Next to each name were 3 dates: contact, commitment, and completion. 10 of the names had all 3 dates filled in. Patty's name was second to last, with a completion date of 3 weeks from now. At the bottom of the list was a name that made my heart stop: Margaret. He knew about me. Somehow, Marcus Reynolds knew I existed and was already planning for me to be his next target. I forced myself to keep breathing and continue searching. In another folder marked Insurance, I found life insurance policies on all his victims, including a $500,000 policy on Patty that he'd taken out 6 months after their wedding. The man was methodical, I'd give him that. But the real treasure was hidden in a folder disguised as tax records. Inside were copies of birth certificates, social security cards, and driver's licenses for at least 6 different identities Marcus had used. Photos of the same man with different hair colors, different facial hair, sometimes even different colored contact lenses. Marcus Reynolds was just his current persona. I was copying files to a USB drive when I heard the sound that made my blood freeze. A car door slamming in the driveway. He was home early. I had maybe 60 seconds before he walked through the front door. I ejected the USB drive, closed all the files, and shut down the computer with hands that barely trembled. Professional crisis management had trained me for situations where seconds mattered. I made it to the living room just as I heard his key in the front door, settling onto the sofa with a book I'd grabbed from the coffee table. When Marcus Reynolds walked into his house, he found his wife reading peacefully, exactly where a good wife should be. "You're home early," I said, looking up with what I hoped was the right combination of surprise and pleasure. "How was poker?" Marcus stood in the doorway studying my face, and I realized I was looking at a predator who'd spent years learning to read people for weakness. He was handsome in the way that successful psychopaths often were, well-groomed, confident, charming when it suited him. But his eyes were calculating, evaluating, already planning his next move. Game broke up early. Jim's wife called with some emergency. He walked closer, and I forced myself not to tense. "How are you feeling? Your face looks better." "Much better, thank you." I smiled and touched my cheek where Patty's bruises were already fading. I was clumsy, but I'll be more careful on the stairs. Marcus sat down beside me on the sofa, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "Patricia, we need to talk about our anniversary trip next month." "Of course. What did you have in mind?" "Somewhere remote, private, where we can really reconnect." His hand found mine, and his touch made my skin crawl. "I've been thinking we should renew our vows. Make it official that we're committed to each other for life." The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. Marcus Reynolds was planning to murder my sister on their anniversary, and he was sitting here making romantic plans while he did it. That sounds wonderful, I managed, squeezing his hand and fighting every instinct that told me to run. I love you too. He leaned over and kissed me, and it took every ounce of self-control I'd ever developed not to recoil. When he pulled away, his eyes were still studying my face. You seem different tonight, Patricia. More confident. That was the moment I realized Marcus Reynolds suspected something was wrong, and I was trapped in his house with no backup plan and nowhere to run. Different how? I asked, tilting my head in the way I'd seen Patty do 1,000 times throughout our lives. The key to successful deception, I'd learned in my corporate consulting days, was to never overreact to probing questions. Marcus was still studying my face with those calculating eyes. More self-assured, I suppose. Yesterday you seemed fragile after your accident. Tonight you seem like your old self again. I laughed softly, the sound coming out exactly like Patty's. Well, a good night's sleep works wonders, and I've had time to think about what you said yesterday about taking better care of myself. What did I say yesterday? The question came too quickly, too sharp. He was testing me. Think, Maggie. What would an abusive husband say to a wife who'd just been injured? I'd been married to one myself, so I knew the playbook. That I need to be more careful. That accidents like this could have been prevented if I'd been paying better attention to my surroundings. I met his gaze directly. You were right, as usual. Something in his expression relaxed slightly, and I realized I'd passed whatever test he'd been administering. Marcus Reynolds was a man who enjoyed being right and having his authority acknowledged. I worry about you when I'm not here, he said, his hand moving to stroke my hair in a gesture that was probably meant to seem affectionate. You're so trusting, Patricia, so innocent. This world can be dangerous for women who don't understand how predators operate. The irony was so profound I almost laughed. Here was a predator warning his intended victim about predators. If I hadn't been wearing my sister's face and sitting in her living room, I might have appreciated the psychological complexity of his manipulation. I know you'll always protect me, I said, leaning into his touch like a trusting wife should. I feel so safe when you're here. Marcus smiled, and it was the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. He actually enjoyed this, the complete trust, the power dynamic, the knowledge that he held someone's life in his hands without them knowing it. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. An early anniversary gift. He pulled out a small velvet box, and my heart started racing. Please don't be an engagement ring to replace the wedding ring. Please don't be something that would require removing jewelry Patty always wore. Inside the box was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant shaped like a key. It was actually quite beautiful, which somehow made it more disturbing. It's lovely, I said, meaning it. What does the key represent? The key to my heart, he said. And his voice was so sincere that I almost believed him. I had it made specially for you. See the inscription on the back? I turned the pendant over and saw tiny engraved words. Forever mine, M. The possessiveness of the message sent chills down my spine, but I smiled like a woman receiving a romantic gift. Marcus, it's perfect. Will you put it on me? As he fastened the necklace around my throat, his fingers lingering longer than necessary on the back of my neck, I realized this wasn't just a gift. It was a collar, a way of marking his territory before he eliminated it. There, he said, his breath warm against my ear. Perfect. You should wear it every day from now on. I will, I promised, though I was already planning to give it to the FBI as evidence. Marcus settled back against the sofa cushions, apparently satisfied with my reactions. Patricia, I've been thinking about our future, about expanding our family. Oh no, this conversation was heading somewhere I was not prepared to go. Expanding how? Children. I think it's time we seriously discussed having a baby. His hand found mine again, and his grip was just a little too tight. I know we've talked about it before, but I feel ready now, more settled in my career. I thought about the timeline spreadsheet I'd found on his computer. With Patty's completion date 3 weeks away, he wasn't planning for a future with children. He was playing out some twisted fantasy of domestic normalcy before he committed murder. That's wonderful to hear, I managed. I've wanted to discuss it too, but I wasn't sure if you were ready. Well, I am. In fact, I think we should start trying right away. The way he said it left no room for discussion. Tonight, even. Every alarm bell in my head started screaming simultaneously. This was escalating far beyond what Patty and I had planned. I needed to find a way out of this situation without arousing more suspicion. Marcus, I touched my bruised cheek gently. I'm still feeling a bit tender from my fall. Maybe we should wait a few days until I'm completely healed. His jaw tightened slightly, and I realized I'd just said something wrong. Patricia, are you having second thoughts about starting a family? The danger in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. This was a man who didn't accept refusal gracefully. Not at all, I said quickly. I just want to be able to give you my complete attention when we try for a baby. Right now I'm still taking pain medication for my headaches, and I know that's not good for conception. It was a reasonable excuse. Medically sound, and it bought me time. Marcus studied my face again, but eventually nodded. You're right, of course. I want our child to have every advantage. He kissed my forehead, a gesture that would have been sweet from any other man. A few more days won't matter. I smiled and leaned against him, playing the part of the loving wife while my mind raced through possibilities. I needed to get out of this house with the evidence I'd gathered, but I also needed to maintain my cover long enough to find more proof of his crimes. I think I'll take a bath and get ready for bed, I said, standing up carefully. Unless you need anything else? Actually, there is something. Marcus stood as well, his height making me feel more vulnerable than usual. I have some business to take care of this weekend, a client meeting that might run late Sunday evening. You won't mind if I'm out of touch for a day or two? A client meeting that lasted 2 days. More likely, he was making arrangements for Patty's murder and needed time to set up his alibi. Of course not. You know I trust your judgment about business matters. I touched the necklace he'd given me. I'll probably just catch up on some reading and maybe reorganize the guest bedroom. Perfect. He kissed me again. And this time, I felt him testing the response, measuring how I kissed him back. Patricia? Yes? I love you. More than you could possibly understand. Coming from a man who was planning to kill me in 3 weeks, the words carried a chilling edge. But I smiled and said what Patty would have said. I love you too, Marcus. Forever. As I walked upstairs to run a bath, I heard him making a phone call. I couldn't make out the words, but his tone was businesslike, efficient. He was confirming arrangements for something, and I had a terrible feeling I knew what it was. In the master bathroom, I finally allowed myself to shake. The USB drive in my pocket felt like it was burning against my leg, loaded with enough evidence to destroy Marcus Reynolds and potentially save other women's lives. But getting that evidence to the right people was going to require staying alive long enough to escape this house. I turned on the water for the bath and sat on the edge of the tub, trying to process everything I'd learned tonight. Marcus wasn't just a serial killer. He was a businessman who'd turned murder into a profitable enterprise. The life insurance policies, the carefully researched victims, the multiple identities all pointed to someone who'd been doing this for years. And he was planning to expand his operation to include me. The water was running hot, and steam was beginning to fog the mirror. In a few minutes, I'd have to finish playing the role of Patty Reynolds, devoted wife to a monster. But tomorrow, when Marcus left for his mysterious business meeting, I'd have access to the rest of his secrets. I just had to survive the night first. From downstairs, I heard Marcus end his phone call and start moving around the house, checking locks and setting the security system. He was methodical about everything, including making sure his victims couldn't escape. But Marcus Reynolds had made one crucial mistake. He thought he was dealing with naive, trusting Patty. Instead, he was trapped in a house with someone who'd built a career on finding hidden threats and eliminating them. The hunter was about to become the hunted. I barely slept that night, hyper-aware of every sound Marcus made, every shift of his body in the bed beside me. He slept deeply, confidently, the sleep of a man who believed he controlled everything in his environment. If he only knew his wife's identical twin was lying 18 inches away, planning his destruction. Saturday morning brought relief in the form of Marcus's rigid schedule. At exactly 6:45, his alarm went off, and he launched into his predictable routine. Shower, coffee, breakfast, local news. I played the role of sleepy, affectionate wife, making small talk about weekend plans while internally counting the minutes until he left for his business meeting. I should be back Sunday evening. he said, kissing my cheek as he gathered his briefcase and overnight bag. Order something nice for dinner tomorrow. Maybe from Romano's. You know how much I love their ossobuco. Of course, I smiled, though the thought of sharing another meal with this man made my stomach turn. Drive safely. The moment his BMW disappeared down the driveway, I was in motion. I had perhaps 36 hours before he returned, and I intended to use every minute of it. First, I called Patty from Marcus's house phone. A calculated risk, but one that established a normal pattern in case anyone checked phone records later. How did it go? Her voice was tight with anxiety. Better than expected. He suspects something's off, but he's not sure what. I bought us time by playing the injured, devoted wife. I walked to the window and confirmed his car was truly gone. Patty, I need to ask you about life insurance. Did Marcus ever have you sign paperwork for a policy? Yes, about 6 months after we got married. He said it was just responsible financial planning. Her voice went quiet. Oh God, Maggie, how much? $500,000, with him as the sole beneficiary. I heard her sharp intake of breath. But here's the interesting part. I found policies on other women too. This isn't passion or rage, Patty. This is Marcus's business model. What do we do now? Now I tear this house apart and find everything that will put him away for life. I was already headed back to his study. Stay at my place, keep the curtains closed, and don't answer the door for anyone. If something goes wrong here, you'll need to disappear until the FBI can protect you. After I hung up, I returned to Marcus's computer with a clearer sense of what I was looking for. The files I'd found last night were damning, but I needed more. I needed bank records, communication with accomplices, and most importantly, evidence of where the bodies were buried. What I found in his email archives was a masterclass in digital serial killing. Marcus maintained correspondence with at least 3 other men who appeared to be running similar operations in different parts of the country. They shared advice on victim selection, discussed best practices for staging accidents, and even traded information about women who'd moved between their territories. One email thread made me physically ill. It was dated 6 months ago and included photos of Patty from their wedding, along with detailed financial information about her real estate business and her lack of close family ties. Marcus had submitted my sister to his partners like she was a business proposal. The responses were encouraging. Excellent choice, one wrote. The professional background gives her credibility, and the isolation makes cleanup easier. Another added practical advice. Anniversary trips work well for our purposes. Remote locations, romantic narrative, less scrutiny from authorities. I was copying these emails when I heard a sound that stopped my heart. A car in the driveway. I ran to the window and saw a silver sedan I didn't recognize. A tall man in an expensive suit was getting out, checking something on his phone before walking toward the front door. I had maybe 30 seconds to shut down the computer, hide the USB drive, and figure out who was about to walk into this house. The doorbell rang just as I settled onto the living room sofa with a magazine. Through the peephole, I saw a man in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested law enforcement or corporate executive. He didn't look like one of Marcus's criminal associates, but I wasn't taking any chances. "Can I help you?" I called through the door. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'm Detective Morrison with the County Sheriff's Office. I was hoping to speak with you and your husband about a case we're working on." My blood went cold. Had someone already discovered Marcus's crimes? Was this a trap? Or worse, was this detective actually working with Marcus? "My husband isn't here right now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's out of town on business until tomorrow." "That's fine. Actually, it's you I wanted to speak with primarily." His voice was professional, reassuring. "It's about your neighbor, Mrs. Chen. I understand you might have some information about her recent activities." Mrs. Chen. I had no idea who that was, or what activities Detective Morrison might be referring to, but refusing to open the door would look suspicious, and I needed to maintain Patty's normal routine. "Of course," I said, opening the door with what I hoped was an appropriately puzzled expression. "Please come in, though I'm not sure how much help I can be." Detective Morrison was exactly what he appeared to be, a tired cop working a case that was probably going nowhere. He accepted my offer of coffee and settled into Marcus's favorite armchair like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "Mrs. Chen reported some suspicious activity in the neighborhood last month," he began, pulling out a small notebook. "Someone going through her garbage, possibly casing houses for burglary. She mentioned seeing an unfamiliar car in your driveway around the same time. I felt relief wash over me. This was a routine neighborhood investigation, nothing to do with Marcus's crimes. I'm sorry, Detective, but I don't recall any unusual visitors that time period. Could you be more specific about the dates? The incidents occurred between the 15th and 20th of last month. Mrs. Chen said she saw a dark-colored sedan in your driveway on the 18th, around midnight. Think, Maggie. What would Patty remember about 3 weeks ago? Oh, that might have been my husband's business partner. He sometimes stops by late when they're working on international deals. Different time zones, you understand. Could you give me his name? We'd like to rule him out as a person of interest. Of course. Daniel Martinez. He works with my husband's import company. I was making up names now, hoping Detective Morrison wouldn't dig too deeply into Marcus's fake business associates. Morrison made notes and asked a few more routine questions about neighborhood security, suspicious vehicles, and whether we'd noticed anything missing from our property. I answered as helpfully as possible, while mentally reviewing everything I'd touched in the study. Had I left any trace that someone had been searching through Marcus's files? One more thing, Morrison said as he prepared to leave. Mrs. Chen mentioned that your husband seemed upset that night when she saw the car. She heard raised voices through her open window. This was information I didn't have. Patty hadn't mentioned any argument with Marcus 3 weeks ago, which meant either it wasn't important enough to remember or it was too important to discuss. My husband takes his business very seriously, I said carefully. If there was a disagreement, it probably involved a shipment delay or customs issue. Nothing unusual for his line of work. Detective Morrison nodded and handed me his card. If you think of anything else, please give me a call. And ask your husband to contact me when he returns from his trip. After he left, I sat in Marcus's living room trying to piece together what had just happened. Mrs. Chen had witnessed an argument between Marcus and an unknown visitor 3 weeks ago. The timing was significant. That would have been right around when Marcus started making more concrete plans for eliminating Patty. I needed to find out who Daniel Martinez really was, and what kind of argument would upset someone as controlled as Marcus Reynolds. Back in the study, I searched for any mention of Martinez in Marcus's files. What I found was a single email exchange from 3 weeks ago, and the content made my hands shake. The timeline has been moved up, Martinez had written. Local law enforcement is asking questions about the Chen woman. We need to accelerate our current project. Marcus's response was brief but chilling. Understood. We'll implement Plan B by month end. Plan B. Patty's murder had been moved up because a nosy neighbor had attracted police attention. I was still processing this discovery when I heard another car in the driveway. This time, it was a black SUV with tinted windows, and the man getting out looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate security handbook. He wasn't here to ask about neighborhood burglaries. As he walked toward the front door, I realized I was about to meet one of Marcus's business partners, and I was completely alone in a house with enough evidence to destroy their entire operation. The man approaching the front door moved with the confidence of someone who belonged here, someone who had a key and the right to enter without permission. I had perhaps 30 seconds to decide whether to answer the door as Patricia Reynolds or find a way to hide. The decision was made for me when I heard the distinctive sound of an electronic lock being disengaged. He had the code to Marcus's security system. I quickly positioned myself in the kitchen, making coffee as if I'd been there all along. When the front door opened, I called out with studied casualness, "Marcus, is that you? I thought you wouldn't be back until tomorrow." "It's not Marcus, Mrs. Reynolds." The voice that answered was smooth, professional, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't immediately place. "My name is Daniel Martinez. I believe the detective mentioned me earlier." So this was the mysterious business partner I'd invented. Except he was real. He knew about Detective Morrison's visit, and he was standing in my kitchen with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh," I said, hoping I looked appropriately surprised rather than terrified. "You must be one of Marcus's colleagues. He didn't mention you were stopping by." Martinez was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of expensive grooming that suggested serious money, but it was his eyes that made my skin crawl. Cold, calculating, like Marcus's, but with less pretense of warmth. "I apologize for the intrusion. I tried calling Marcus, but his phone goes straight to voicemail." He moved closer, and I noticed he was studying my face the same way Marcus had the night before. I hope you don't mind, but we had some urgent business matters to discuss. Of course not. Can I get you some coffee? I gestured toward the pot I'd just started, buying time to think. Marcus mentioned he was meeting with clients this weekend. Are you part of that project? In a manner of speaking. Martinez settled onto one of the kitchen bar stools, making himself comfortable in a way that suggested he'd been here many times before. Tell me, Patricia, how have you been feeling lately? Marcus mentioned you had an accident. The way he said my name was wrong, too familiar, like he knew me better than he should. And his question about my health felt more like an evaluation than polite concern. Much better, thank you. Just a silly fall down the stairs. I turned to pour coffee, using the motion to hide my expression. Marcus worries too much sometimes. He cares about you deeply. In fact, you're all he talks about lately. Martinez accepted the coffee mug with a brief nod of thanks. He's very excited about your upcoming anniversary plans. There it was. Confirmation that Marcus's business associates knew about his plan to murder me. More than that, they were actively involved in coordinating it. He's been so secretive about the details, I said, settling onto the stool across from him. You know how men are with surprises. Martinez laughed, and the sound was genuinely amused in a way that made my blood run cold. Oh, I think you'll find it's quite memorable. Marcus has put a lot of thought into making sure it's an experience you'll never forget. I forced myself to smile while internally screaming. These men were discussing my sister's murder like it was a romantic getaway, finding humor in their own twisted plans. Can I ask you something? I said, leaning forward conspiratorially. How long have you and Marcus been working together? He's mentioned you, of course, but I don't think I know the whole story of your partnership. It was a dangerous question, too curious for a wife who was supposed to remain ignorant of her husband's business. But I needed to understand the scope of their operation. Martinez studied my face again, and I saw the exact moment when his expression shifted from polite interest to active suspicion. Patricia, you seem different today. More inquisitive than usual. Do I? I've been reading more lately. Marcus encourages me to stay informed about current events. It was a weak explanation, but the best I could come up with on short notice. Reading. How interesting. Martinez reached into his jacket pocket, and I tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out his phone. You know, I was just thinking about our conversation last month, the one about your sister. My blood turned to ice. Marcus had told his partners about me. My sister? I tried to look confused while my mind raced through possibilities. How much did they know? Did they suspect I was here right now? Your twin sister, Margaret, I believe. Marcus mentioned she lives about an hour away. Martinez was scrolling through his phone, looking for something. He said she's quite successful. A consultant of some kind? Yes, she does cybersecurity consulting. The words came out automatically, but I realized too late that I'd just confirmed information they were testing me on. Cybersecurity. How fascinating. Martinez found whatever he was looking for on his phone and turned the screen toward me. Is this her? I found myself looking at a photo of myself leaving my own house, taken with a telephoto lens. The timestamp showed it was from yesterday morning, which meant they'd been watching me before Patty ever showed up at my door. Yes, that's Maggie, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Where did you get this photo? We like to know about all of Marcus's family connections. For security purposes, you understand. Martinez put his phone away and leaned back on his stool. Tell me, Patricia, when was the last time you spoke with your sister? It was a trap question, and I knew it. Knew? They probably had surveillance on both of us, which meant they might know about Patty's middle-of-the-night visit to my house. A few weeks ago, I think. We don't talk as often as we should. I stood up and moved toward the coffee pot, needing to put some distance between us. You know how it is with family. Everyone gets busy with their own lives. Martinez was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear him weighing my answers against whatever information he already had. Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. I turned to face him, coffee pot in hand, trying to project calm curiosity instead of the terror that was racing through my veins. Did your sister contact you yesterday or last night? There it was. They knew. Somehow, Martinez and his associates had discovered that Patty had come to me for help, which meant they probably suspected our switch as well. I had two choices: maintain the deception and hope I could outmaneuver them, or admit the truth and try to negotiate from a position of honesty. Both options could get me killed, but one might save Patty's life. Why would you ask that? I said, deflecting with a question of my own. Martinez smiled, and this time it was genuinely warm in a way that was more terrifying than his cold professionalism had been. Because, Mrs. Reynolds, I don't think you're Patricia at all. The coffee pot slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor, sending glass and hot liquid everywhere. In the silence that followed, I heard the front door open and close again. Marcus's voice carried into the kitchen. Daniel, I see you started without me. I hope Margaret has been entertaining. They'd known from the moment I walked into this house. The whole charade, the romantic dinner, the anniversary gift. It had all been theater designed to keep me here until they were ready to make their move. I was trapped in a house with two serial killers who'd been planning to murder both Campbell twins from the beginning. And now they were done pretending. Hello, Margaret, Marcus said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with that same cold smile I'd seen him give Patty. I have to say, the resemblance is quite remarkable. Daniel and I were just discussing how long we should let you continue the performance. I stood frozen among the shattered coffee pot, my mind racing through escape routes that all led to dead ends. The front door was blocked by Marcus. The back door required crossing past Martinez, and the windows in this kitchen were too high and too narrow to provide realistic escape routes. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, though we all knew the pretense was over. I'm Patricia, your wife. Martinez laughed and pulled out his phone again, this time showing me a different photo. This one was of Patty getting into a taxi outside my house at 5 a.m. yesterday morning. The timestamp was clearly visible. Your sister left your house 6 hours after she arrived, Martinez said conversationally. We've been tracking both of you since she discovered Marcus's safety deposit box. That's impossible. Patty couldn't have known about any safety deposit box. But even as I said it, I realized they'd wanted her to find it. This entire situation had been orchestrated. Marcus moved into the kitchen, carefully stepping around the broken glass until he was close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. Margaret, you're a cybersecurity consultant. Surely you understand the concept of a honeypot trap. Of course. They'd left evidence for Patty to find, knowing she'd run to me for help. They'd counted on our identical appearance and our history of switching places. This wasn't a desperate escape plan we'd stumbled into. It was a carefully designed trap that would let them eliminate both twins simultaneously. Very clever, I said, dropping the pretense entirely. But if you knew we'd switched places, why let me spend the night here? Why not just grab both of us yesterday? Because we needed to know how much you'd discovered and who you might have told. Martinez was still perched casually on his bar stool, like we were discussing the weather. Your search of Marcus's computer was quite thorough. We're impressed. Not thorough enough, apparently. Oh, you found everything we wanted you to find, Marcus said. The false identities, the insurance policies, even the victim list. All very convincing evidence of a serial killer's operation. False identities. Victim list. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You're not serial killers at all. Well, we are killers, Martinez clarified helpfully. But we're not serial killers in the traditional sense. We're professionals. Marcus nodded approvingly. We eliminate specific targets for specific clients. The romance and marriage angle is just one method among many, very effective for accessing wealthy widows, but hardly our only approach. I thought about the spreadsheet I'd found, the detailed victim profiles, the coordination between multiple operatives across different states. This wasn't the work of twisted individuals acting out psychological compulsions. This was organized crime. Who hired you to kill Patty? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Patricia's business partner, Marcus said. Apparently your sister discovered some financial irregularities in their real estate firm. Rather than face investigation and potential jail time, he decided to eliminate the problem permanently. Rebecca's ex-husband, Richard, the man who'd been slowly draining money from their real estate business and needed Patty to disappear before she could expose him. He'd hired professional killers and paid for an elaborate long-term operation to make her death look like an accident. And me? I asked. What's my crime? Being inconveniently related to the target, Martinez replied. Plus, your cybersecurity background makes you a potential threat if you start investigating your sister's death. Much cleaner to eliminate both twins in a single operation. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small pistol. The plan was actually quite romantic. A murder-suicide on our anniversary trip. Grieving widower Marcus would tell police that Patricia had discovered his affair and shot him before turning the gun on herself. Very tragic. Very believable. But now you'll have to improvise, I said, looking for any opportunity to create chaos or confusion. 2 identical twins found dead in your house is going to be a lot harder to explain. Actually, no. Martinez stood up and moved toward the kitchen window. We're not going to be found in Marcus's house. We're going to be found in a car accident on a remote mountain road, victims of a tragic accident during a sisters' reconciliation trip. They'd thought of everything. Patricia Reynolds would disappear from the house, presumed to have left with her sister for a weekend getaway. Margaret Campbell's car would be found burned out in a canyon with 2 bodies inside, too damaged for immediate identification. By the time DNA results came back weeks later, Marcus Reynolds would have vanished along with his current identity. You seem remarkably calm for someone in your situation, Marcus observed, studying my face with professional interest. Most people would be crying or begging by now. Most people haven't spent decades dealing with corporate threats and hostile takeovers, I replied. Fear doesn't help you think clearly. No, it doesn't. Marcus seemed genuinely impressed. Daniel, I think I understand why she's been so successful in her field. She has excellent crisis management skills. Martinez nodded appreciatively. Too bad we couldn't have recruited her instead of eliminating her. Someone with her background could have been very useful to our organization. I filed that information away. They were part of a larger organization, which meant more people involved and more complex operational structures. But it also meant more opportunities for mistakes and more potential witnesses. Can I ask one question before you kill me? I said, stalling for time while I scanned the kitchen for potential weapons. Of course, Marcus said graciously. Professional courtesy. How did you know we'd switch places? That seems like a very specific bet to make. Martinez and Marcus exchanged glances, and I saw something pass between them. Amusement, maybe even pride. Because, Marcus said, we've been planning this operation for 8 months. We know everything about both Campbell twins, including your history of impersonating each other. Your high school principal kept very detailed records of your various pranks and identity switches. 8 months. They'd been studying us, learning our habits and personalities, building psychological profiles that let them predict our responses to crisis. This wasn't just professional killing. It was psychological warfare at its most sophisticated. The safety deposit box, the documents Patricia found, even the timing of her discovery, all carefully orchestrated to push her toward exactly the choice she made. Martinez pulled out his own weapon, a larger pistol that looked like it meant business. We've been manipulating both of you since Marcus first asked Patricia out. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of building trust and intimacy, all designed to position my sister for eventual murder. The scope of the deception was almost admirable in its complexity. All right, I said, setting down the cup I'd been holding. You've got us both exactly where you want us. What happens now? Marcus checked his watch. Now we collect your sister and take a scenic drive to the mountains. We have a very specific timeline to maintain. But as he reached for his phone to call his associates, I heard the sound that made my heart leap with hope. Police sirens approaching the house. Martinez heard them too, and immediately moved to the kitchen window. Marcus, we have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that involves 3 police cars turning into your driveway. I couldn't help smiling as the pieces fell into place. You forgot one thing in all your psychological profiling. What's that? Marcus asked, though he was already moving toward the back door. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. I never go anywhere without a backup plan. While they'd been watching me search Marcus's computer, they'd missed the silent alarm system I'd triggered on my phone. The same system I used to alert clients when their networks were under attack had just sent my location and an emergency code to the FBI Cybercrime Division. The cavalry was here, and Marcus Reynolds' perfectly planned operation was about to become a federal case. But first, I had to survive the next 5 minutes. The police sirens were getting closer, but Marcus and Martinez weren't panicking like I'd hoped. Instead, they moved with the calm efficiency of professionals who'd planned for this contingency. How many exit strategies do we have? Martinez asked, speaking into a small radio I hadn't noticed before. 3, came the reply from someone else in the operation. Team 2 is positioning at the rear perimeter now. Team 2. There were more of them, and they'd been stationed around the property as backup. My federal alert had brought help, but I'd also triggered what looked like a small war in suburban Maryland. "Margaret, you're going to walk out the front door with us," Marcus said, pressing his pistol against my back. "If you alert the officers in any way, we'll disappear into the woods, and your sister will be dead within the hour." It was a convincing threat. But I'd noticed something Marcus hadn't. The radio chatter was coming through too clearly. Professional criminal organizations used encrypted communications, not off-the-shelf equipment that could be monitored by law enforcement. These weren't the sophisticated operators they'd pretended to be. They were skilled, dangerous, and well-organized, but they'd made mistakes. "You're not going to hurt Patty," I said, with more confidence than I felt, "because you don't actually know where she is." Martinez's radio crackled again. "Perimeter secured, no visual on the secondary target." I saw Marcus's jaw tighten slightly. They'd been monitoring my house, but they'd lost track of Patty somewhere between last night and this morning. Their perfect surveillance operation had a gap. "Smart, sister," Martinez said, almost admiringly. "Where did you tell her to go?" "Somewhere you'll never find her." Which was true, since I'd told her to stay put at my house. If their surveillance was as flawed as their radio security, she might actually be safe. The police sirens had reached the house now, and I could hear car doors slamming and officers taking positions outside. Through the kitchen window, I saw at least 4 vehicles and what looked like a tactical response team. "This is Detective Morrison," a voice called through a megaphone. "We have a warrant to search the premises. Please exit the building with your hands visible." Detective Morrison, the same officer who'd questioned me earlier about neighborhood burglaries. Either his timing was spectacularly coincidental, or my federal alert had been routed through local law enforcement. "Mrs. Reynolds, if you're inside, please come to the front door," Morrison continued. "We need to verify your safety." Marcus smiled, and it was the most genuine expression I'd seen from him yet. "Perfect. They think you're Patricia, which means they don't know about the switch. This actually makes things easier." He was right. If the police believed they were rescuing Patricia Reynolds from a domestic disturbance or burglary in progress, they wouldn't be prepared for a professional killing team with backup personnel and escape routes. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice calm and controlled. "You're going to open the front door and tell Detective Morrison that everything is fine. A case of mistaken emergency alerts. You'll apologize for the confusion and ask them to leave. And if I refuse?" Martinez held up his radio. "Then my associates will start shooting police officers, beginning with Detective Morrison. A lot of good people will die because you decided to be heroic." The threat was credible enough that I couldn't risk calling their bluff. But I also couldn't just send the police away and let Marcus and Martinez kill both Patty and me at their leisure. I needed a third option. "All right," I said, moving toward the front door. "But I want your word that you'll let Patty live if I cooperate." "You're not in a position to negotiate," Marcus pointed out. "Actually, I am. Because if something happens to me and I don't check in with my cybersecurity team by 6 p.m. today, they're going to release everything I copied from your computer to the FBI, the DEA, and about 6 major news organizations." It was a bluff, but a good one. Professional killers would understand dead man's switches and automated data releases. Martinez spoke quietly into his radio, then listened to a response I couldn't hear. "Your move, Margaret. But make it fast. My people are getting nervous with all these police around." I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, immediately raising my hands to show I wasn't armed. Detective Morrison was positioned behind his patrol car with his weapon drawn, scanning the windows of the house for threats. "Mrs. Reynolds, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Detective," I called back, very conscious of the gun pointed at my back through the partially opened door. "I think there's been some mistake." Morrison lowered his weapon slightly, but didn't relax his position. "We received an emergency alert from this address. Possible home invasion or domestic violence situation." Behind me, I heard Marcus whisper, "Get rid of them. Now." But I'd noticed something else. One of the tactical officers had positioned himself with a clear view of the kitchen window where Martinez was standing. If I could give them a signal that something was wrong. "Detective, I'm sorry for the confusion," I said, speaking loudly enough to be heard clearly. "My husband Marcus Reynolds is inside with his business partner Daniel Martinez. They were just leaving for a meeting." I emphasized their names deliberately, making sure the officers heard them clearly. If Morrison ran those names through his database, He might find connections to other investigations. "Ma'am, we still need to verify that you're safe," Morrison replied. "Can you step away from the house so we can talk?" Perfect. I started walking down the front steps, moving away from the door and potentially out of the line of fire. But I'd only made it 3 steps when I heard the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. From somewhere in the woods surrounding the house, one of Marcus's backup team had taken aim at Detective Morrison. "Get down!" I screamed, throwing myself toward the police cars just as the first shot rang out. Chaos erupted immediately. Police officers dove for cover. Morrison was shouting orders into his radio, and return fire started coming from at least 3 different positions around the property. I crawled behind Morrison's patrol car, staying low as bullets shattered windows and chewed through the front porch of Marcus's house. "Mrs. Reynolds, are you hit?" Morrison had positioned himself beside me, his radio crackling with reports from other officers. "No, I'm fine. But Detective, you need to know. I'm not Patricia Reynolds. I'm her twin sister Margaret Campbell, and the men in that house are professional killers." Morrison stared at me for a split second, processing this information. "How many men? What kind of weapons?" "At least 4, maybe more. Marcus Reynolds and Daniel Martinez are inside with handguns. Unknown number in the woods with rifles." I ducked lower as another shot spiderwebbed the rear window of the patrol car. "They're part of an organized killing operation. They were planning to murder my sister and make it look like an accident." Into his radio, Morrison called for additional backup, federal support, and a negotiator. But I could tell from the radio chatter that this was escalating beyond local police capabilities. "Detective, there's something else you need to know," I said. "They have a timeline. If they don't check in with their organization by a certain time, other operatives will start eliminating witnesses. This isn't just about catching 2 killers. It's about dismantling a murder-for-hire network." Morrison's expression hardened. "How much do you know about their operation?" "Everything. I downloaded their files, their victim lists, their financial records, their communications with other cells. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket, grateful it had survived the morning's chaos. This contains enough evidence to destroy their entire organization." Jesus. Morrison took the drive and immediately called for federal agents and digital forensic support. "Ma'am, you realize you just became the most important witness in probably the biggest organized crime case this county has ever seen?" I did realize that. I also realized that Marcus and Martinez would do anything to prevent that evidence from reaching federal authorities, which meant the real fight was just getting started. From inside the house, I heard Marcus's voice calling out, "Detective Morrison, I'd like to propose a trade." This wasn't going to end with a simple arrest. Marcus Reynolds was about to turn a suburban crime scene into a hostage situation, and I was still the only thing standing between his organization and complete success. "I'm listening," Detective Morrison called back toward the house, though his hand signals made it clear he was coordinating something with the tactical team. Marcus's voice carried clearly from an upstairs window. "I have information about a terrorist cell operating in this county, active plots against federal buildings. But I'll only share it in exchange for safe passage out of here." It was a clever deflection, offering to trade fictional terrorism intelligence for real escape opportunities. But I could see Morrison wasn't buying it. "What kind of terrorist activity?" Morrison called back, clearly stalling while backup units surrounded the property. "The kind that involves truck bombs and federal courthouses," Marcus replied. "The kind that's scheduled to happen this week unless you get me safely to a federal facility where I can provide full details." I had to admit, it was psychologically sophisticated. Even if law enforcement suspected he was lying, they couldn't risk ignoring a credible-sounding threat against federal buildings. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He was still underestimating me. "Detective," I whispered, staying low behind the patrol car. "He's lying about the terrorism, but he's not lying about having deadlines. His organization operates on strict timelines. If he misses his next check-in, they'll start cleaning up loose ends." "What kind of loose ends?" "Witnesses, other victims they've been planning to eliminate, maybe even their own lower-level operatives." I thought about the email threads I'd found, the casual discussion of murder as business practice. These people don't leave survivors when operations go wrong. Morrison spoke rapidly into his radio, requesting federal support and coordination with FBI counterterrorism units. I could tell he was taking the threat seriously while trying to maintain control of an increasingly complex situation. From somewhere in the woods, I heard movement, branches breaking, footsteps in dead leaves. Marcus's backup team was repositioning, either to improve their firing angles or to prepare escape routes. "Detective Morrison!" This time it was Martinez's voice from a different window. "We have a counterproposal. Go ahead. Margaret Campbell walks back into this house, and we'll surrender peacefully. No one else gets hurt, and we'll provide full cooperation with federal authorities." Morrison looked at me, his expression making it clear that wasn't going to happen. "Not a chance. Then we start executing hostages in 10 minutes? Hostages. The word hit me like ice water. "Detective, they don't have any hostages, unless what? Unless they've been holding someone else this whole time." I thought about the victim timeline I'd found, the efficiency of their operation, the careful planning that went into every murder. What if they have another woman somewhere? Someone else they were planning to eliminate? Morrison's radio crackled with an urgent update. "Detective, we've got federal agents en route, ETA 12 minutes. Also, we ran those names through NCIC. Marcus Reynolds and Daniel Martinez are connected to at least 6 missing persons cases in 4 different states. 6 missing persons. That was more than the victim list I'd found, which meant either their operation was larger than I'd realized, or they were currently holding captives somewhere. "Marcus!" I called toward the house, making a decision that would either save lives or get me killed. "I know about the other women." Silence from the house. Then, after nearly 30 seconds, Marcus's voice, "What other women?" "The ones you're holding while you set up their accidents. The ones whose disappearances will be noticed if they don't check in with their families." It was educated guessing, but based on professional operational logic. "How many are there?" "Marcus, how many women are sitting in a warehouse or a basement somewhere waiting for you to come back?" More silence. But this time, I heard voices from inside the house. Urgent, heated discussion between Marcus and Martinez. Morrison was staring at me with something approaching awe. "How did you know?" "Because I understand how their business model works. They can't just grab someone and kill them immediately. That creates timeline conflicts and reduces their ability to stage believable accidents." I kept my voice low, though I suspected Marcus was monitoring our conversation somehow. "They need time to study the victims, access their finances, and set up the staging, which means they probably have a facility where they hold people during the planning phase." "Jesus, how many people are we talking about?" Before I could answer, Martinez's voice came from the house again. "Margaret Campbell, you have 1 minute to walk through that front door, or we start making phone calls to our associates." Associates. Plural. I'd been right about the scope of their operation, but I'd also just figured out their vulnerability. "Detective, I need to tell you something important about the USB drive," I said urgently. "The files I downloaded don't just contain victim lists and financial records. They contain location data." Morrison's eyes widened. "Locations of what? Properties, warehouses, safe houses, GPS coordinates for every facility their organization uses." I could hear movement in the house now. Footsteps, doors closing, the sound of people preparing to move. "If we can get that data to federal agents before Marcus makes those phone calls, we can save whoever they're holding captive." 30 seconds, Martinez called out. "After that, we start eliminating assets." Morrison was already on his radio, trying to expedite federal response while coordinating with the tactical team. But I could see the math wasn't going to work out. Federal agents were still 8 minutes away, and Marcus wasn't going to wait that long, which left me with one option that might save the lives of unknown women being held captive by this organization. "I'm going in," I told Morrison quietly. "Absolutely not. That's suicide." "No, it's negotiation, because Marcus and Martinez have made one crucial mistake in all their planning." I checked my phone and saw that it was 4:17 p.m. "They think they're dealing with a scared victim who stumbled into their operation, aren't they?" I smiled, feeling the same cold focus that had made me successful in corporate crisis management. "Detective, I spent 20 years dismantling criminal networks for Fortune 500 companies. I know how to destroy organizations from the inside." "Time's up," Marcus called from the house. I stood up, ignoring Morrison's attempts to pull me back down. "Marcus, I'm coming in, but I want to discuss terms." "No terms, just come inside." "Wrong answer," I called back. "Because if I don't walk out of that house alive in exactly 1 hour, every piece of data I downloaded from your computer gets released automatically to federal law enforcement." Silence. Then the sound of intense discussion from inside the house. Finally, Marcus's voice. "What kind of terms?" "The kind where we discuss the future of your organization like professionals instead of playing games with local police." I started walking toward the house, ignoring Morrison's urgent whispers behind me. "I have information you need, Marcus, and you have information I want." "What information?" I reached the front porch and stopped just outside the door. "I know where your money is, Marcus. All of it. Every account, every offshore transfer, every shell company you've used to hide 8 years of murder profits." The door opened, and Marcus stood there with his pistol raised, but not aimed directly at me. His expression was calculatedly neutral, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "How could you possibly know about our financial structure?" "Because," I said, stepping across the threshold into a house where I'd probably die in the next hour, "I'm better at cybersecurity than you are at operational security. And I've been downloading your organization's data for a lot longer than just last night." The door closed behind me, and I found myself face to face with 2 professional killers who were about to learn that their perfect operation had been compromised from the very beginning. But first, I had to survive long enough to destroy them. Inside Marcus's house, the atmosphere had shifted from domestic normalcy to operational tension. Martinez was monitoring multiple communication devices while Marcus studied printed maps spread across the dining room table. This wasn't just a botched murder anymore. It was a criminal organization in crisis management mode. "Explain," Marcus said, without looking up from his maps. "How long have you been accessing our systems?" 3 weeks, I lied smoothly, settling into a chair with studied confidence. "Ever since Patty mentioned irregularities in her real estate partner's financial records, I started investigating Richard's connections and discovered he'd hired outside contractors for a substantial elimination project." Marcus finally looked at me, and I saw the exact moment when his professional evaluation shifted from dismissive to respectful. "You've been tracking us for 3 weeks?" "I've been tracking you for 3 weeks. I've been documenting your organization for 8 months. I pulled out my phone, showing them a screen full of financial data that I'd actually just downloaded last night but presented as long-term surveillance. "Did you really think you could operate a murder-for-hire business without attracting attention from federal cybersecurity monitoring?" Martinez set down his radio and joined us at the table. "You're claiming to be a federal operative?" "I'm claiming to be a cybersecurity consultant who specializes in tracking financial crimes for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Your organization's digital footprint has been under investigation since last spring." The lies were coming easily now, built on a foundation of real knowledge about their operation. The only question was whether to roll you up piecemeal or wait for a major operation that would expose your entire network. "And Patty discovering the safety deposit box?" Marcus asked. "Was the perfect opportunity to gather real-time intelligence on your operational methods." I leaned forward, projecting the confidence of someone holding superior cards. "Did you think it was coincidence that she found exactly the evidence that would send her running to her sister?" I saw doubt creep into Marcus's expression. Professional criminals were paranoid by nature, and I was feeding that paranoia with a narrative that made their recent troubles the result of federal investigation rather than their own mistakes. "You're lying," Martinez said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I opened another screen on my phone, showing them bank routing information I'd copied from their computer. "Account number 4827-915633001 at Cayman International Trust. Opened 18 months ago with a wire transfer from Reynolds International Trading. Current balance approximately $2.3 million. Both men went very still. That account information wasn't something I should have known without extensive surveillance capabilities. "Account number 773129485567 at Swiss Banking Consortium," I continued. "Opened 3 years ago. Current balance $4.1 million. Funded through 8 separate transactions from eliminated victims' estate accounts." Marcus was staring at me with something approaching awe. "How do you have access to Swiss banking records?" "Because the U.S. Attorney's office has been building a RICO case against your organization for months. International financial cooperation, shared intelligence, the whole federal apparatus. I was making up details now, but they fit with what these men would expect from a major federal investigation. Your entire financial network is mapped. Marcus, every account, every transfer, every shell company you've used to hide murder profits. Then why haven't we been arrested? Martinez asked. Because arresting you doesn't help the women you're currently holding captive. I watched their faces carefully, looking for any reaction that would confirm my suspicion. How many are there, Marcus? How many women are sitting in your facilities right now, waiting for you to return? The reaction was subtle, but definitive. Marcus's hand tightened on his pistol, and Martinez glanced unconsciously toward one of his maps. I'd been right about the captives. There are no captives, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Location 7734 in the Industrial District. Warehouse facility registered to Henderson Import Company. I was reading coordinates from his computer files, gambling that the numbers corresponded to holding facilities. Location 9482 in rural Frederick County. Farmhouse property purchased through Coastal Development LLC. Martinez was reaching for his radio, but Marcus stopped him with a gesture. What do you want? Marcus asked quietly. I want the women released unharmed. I want the locations of all your organization's facilities. And I want the complete client list with evidence of payments received for elimination services. I set my phone on the table between us. In exchange, I'll give you something your organization needs more than money, which is time. Specifically, 24 hours to disappear before federal agents start raiding every property on this list. I showed them a screen full of GPS coordinates, property records, and facility photos. Your choice. Cooperate and run, or spend the rest of your lives in federal prison. Marcus and Martinez exchanged glances, having a conversation through micro-expressions that I couldn't entirely read. Finally, Marcus nodded slowly. How do we know you'll honor the agreement? Because I'm not interested in arresting foot soldiers. I want the organization that hired you to kill my sister. I stood up and moved to the window, checking the police positions outside. Richard hired you to eliminate Patty, but Richard was working for someone else, someone who needed her investigation capabilities neutralized permanently. It was another educated guess, but Marcus's expression confirmed I was right. Richard hadn't initiated the contract. He'd been a middleman for larger interests. Who's the client, Marcus? We don't ask those questions. But you keep records. Client codes, payment sources, communication methods. I turned back to face them. Because professional criminal organizations always keep insurance against their clients. Martinez finally spoke up. Federal agents are still outside. How do we arrange the exchange? Simple. You make the calls to release the captives. I verify their safety through federal channels. Then you provide the client information and facility locations. I checked my phone. After that, you have a 24-hour head start before law enforcement moves on your remaining assets. And the financial accounts? Frozen, of course. But your lives are worth more than your bank balances. I smiled coldly. Unless you'd prefer to explain 8 murders to a federal jury. Marcus was quiet for nearly a minute, weighing options that all led to the destruction of everything he'd built. Finally, he reached for his phone. Daniel, start making the calls. Release protocols for all current assets. As Martinez began coordinating the release of their captives, I realized I'd successfully bluffed my way into dismantling a murder-for-hire operation with nothing more than the evidence I'd stolen and a talent for psychological manipulation. But I'd also realized something else. The organization that had hired Marcus to kill Patty was larger and more dangerous than either of us had imagined. 3 hours later, I sat in FBI headquarters watching federal agents coordinate raids on 17 properties across 6 states. The women Marcus and Martinez had been holding, 4 of them, including one who'd been missing for 8 months, were safe in federal protection. The financial records I'd provided had exposed a criminal network that stretched from coast to coast. And the client who'd ordered my sister's death turned out to be someone we'd never suspected, Patricia's best friend since college, who'd been embezzling from their real estate partnership for years and needed Patty eliminated before her investigation uncovered the theft. Marcus and Martinez had kept their end of the bargain, providing complete client records before disappearing into whatever escape routes professional criminals maintained for exactly this situation. The FBI would catch them eventually, but for now, they were running with nothing more than the clothes on their backs and the knowledge that their empire was completely destroyed. Detective Morrison found me in the Federal Building's cafeteria at midnight, nursing my third cup of coffee and trying to process everything that had happened. "Your sister wants to see you," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "She's been debriefed, medically cleared, and probably wants to kill you for not telling her the full plan." I laughed, feeling the first genuine emotion I'd experienced in hours. Patty always hated it when I improvised. For what it's worth, Agent Chen tells me your improvisation saved at least 6 lives today, the women they were holding, plus however many future victims they would have eliminated. Morrison studied my face. "How did you know they were keeping captives?" "Because I understand how predators operate. They always want more control, more power, more time to enjoy their victims' fear." I finished my coffee and stood up. Marcus and Martinez were too organized, too methodical. That kind of efficiency requires preparation time. And the financial data? How much of that was real? I smiled, remembering the moment when Marcus had believed I'd been investigating him for months. "All of it. I'm very good at my job, Detective." Walking out of the Federal Building into the early morning air, I realized that my quiet suburban life was probably over. Federal prosecutors would want my testimony. Criminal defense attorneys would try to discredit me. Media attention would follow any case this large and this complex. But Patty was alive, 4 women were free, and a murder-for-hire organization had been destroyed. Some complications were worth accepting. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Next time you decide to take on professional killers, maybe give me more than 12 hours notice. Also, I owe you dinner for the rest of my life. Love you, sis." I smiled and texted back, "Next time, don't marry a serial killer without doing a background check first. But yes, you definitely owe me dinner." As I drove through the empty streets toward home, I thought about Marcus Reynolds and his carefully planned operation to eliminate both Campbell twins. He'd been right about one thing. We were identical in appearance and similar in many ways, but he'd underestimated the most important similarity we shared. Campbell women don't go down without a fight, and we never, ever let anyone hurt our family. The story ends with both sisters alive, the criminal organization destroyed, and justice served. But most importantly, it ends with the knowledge that some bonds, like the one between identical twins, are stronger than any threat that tries to break them. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.